Mr Chairman, like many of my colleagues, I wasn't prepared for the debate to proceed on this bill at this particular time. I've got all of the submissions that we received on the Select Committee sitting upstairs in my office, and I of course didn't have time to go and get those, but of course I'll be able to bring them down for my second call after other colleagues have had their go on this particular matter. I just want to comment on a point, though, that Paseta Sam Lotoinga has made in his contribution to the debate, which is to reflect on how this ties in with the budget. And I just wanted to remind the House that this bill was introduced actually when I was the Minister of Commerce on the 9th of September 2008. And it didn't get its first reading until the 25th of May 2010. So why the rush now? And I think that starts to expose a little bit of what's really been going on here tonight. Why did the government suddenly call an adjournment to the budget debate and hold it over so that this urgent piece of business could be dealt with? And we've had the Minister take one very brief call, and we've had the Deputy Chair, as he was then, of the Select Committee take another call. It doesn't seem to me like the government is actually really getting in behind this legislation. Now, I do want to call to account, though, one of my own colleagues, not the spokesperson on Commerce, of course, very good spokesperson indeed, much better than the last one, but I think that the person that I want to pull up is the person that said that it sat at the Select Committee for a long time. It didn't. It was referred to us, as I say, on the 25th of May 2010, and we reported it back on the 22nd of November 2010. Now that was before the last election, and now we're dealing with it in the committee stages in May, and actually it's June at the end of the week. And it seems to me that if this was such an urgent piece of business for the government, they would have gotten onto it well before now. But there's more. Well, I don't think the thought of Jerry Brownlee sitting on anything is quite the appropriate mind's eye that I want to bring to this particular piece of legislation. But the bill actually has an interesting history, though, because it goes back even further. Because the original discussion document was put out in 2004, and in fact, as a result of the discussion paper that went out and a good deal more consultation with affected parties and those that had an interest in these matters, with feedback going back to the Cabinet, and then in 2005, and then indeed further decisions in 2007, it was decided that there would be this new legislation which we introduced in 2008. But what's really interesting, and that was flowing on from the comments that the member made about the engagement with the Australians on this matter and why this is suddenly so imperative. Do you know when Australia introduced their amendments to the ACCC so that the New Zealand Commerce Commission could have a cooperation agreement with the ACCC? They did it in 2007. Which is when we made the decision to do precisely the same thing, and that's why we introduced the legislation in 2008. But it is now 2012, and we've had this slippage, and all we've had from the other side is kind of, sort of an attack from the previous speaker, which doesn't seem to be very well directed, because I think there's a degree of looking in the mirror that is required when considering about how we've progressed this bill since it's come to the House. Now, it's also been several months since it was at the Select Committee, so I've had to use my iPhone, new technology, to find the relevant submission that I was looking for, because I think Russell McVeigh made a very interesting point. And although they stated they talk about how the bill only talks about compulsorily acquired information, and that's the area that I think the Minister should give a little bit of feedback on to the House, so that we've got it on the record here. and that was the concern, Mr Chairman, the concern that the Commission would in fact use Section 98 notices at a time when it already knew that information could be disclosed under a Section 98 notice. Because of course you can see from the legislation itself that in fact you can only provide compulsorily acquired information and investigative assistance in accordance with Sections 99H to 99J, and that means that you have to actually look at the definition of it being compulsorily acquired, but it has to be under Section 98 it comes under the definition clause. It has to be compulsorily acquired information under a Section 98 notice or under one of the other provisions. Yeah, 98, 98A or 98H. So the three provisions are included in the compulsorily acquired information definition. But what they were concerned about was that in a leniency process, a company may in fact disclose that certain information was available, and what Russell McVeigh were highlighting is that the Commission could then issue a Section 98 notice, and it would then meet the requirements of the compulsorily acquired information as the basis for issuing that information to an overseas jurisdiction. So something that was made available in a voluntary sense could become compulsorily acquired information if in fact the Commerce Commission were to use Section 98 in that way. And I think it would be very useful, because we were absolutely persuaded that the Commission wouldn't do that at the Select Committee, but we really would like to have the Minister on the floor of this House actually put it on the record that the Commerce Commission wouldn't do that. Because when we switch to the clause that actually talks about providing compulsory acquired information, apart from the protections around the government-to-government agreement and the regulator-to-regulator agreements, you have to look in each case as to whether it is likely to assist the recognised overseas regulator in performing its functions or exercising its powers in relation to competition law, and the provision of the information will not be inconsistent with the cooperation arrangement, and then there's a prejudice provision around trade interests. But if we actually look at that, then at that point the concern of the regulator in New Zealand becomes the concern of the regulator overseas. And so if the regulator in New Zealand originally knew of the existence of the information because of the voluntary disclosure of that under a leniency process, then there was a concern that that would then become compulsorily acquired information. And I think that, for the sake of, there weren't that many submissions that came before the Select Committee, but I thought that Russell McVeigh had put a lot of thought into their submission, because they were actually arguing that in fact this law was necessary. So they weren't arguing against the law, they were just raising a particular concern about how the law could operate in practice, and that could mean an overseas regulator would really want our regulator to be doing their job for them in a way that wasn't necessarily going to be enhancing our position in terms of protecting the interests of New Zealand consumers in terms of any anti-competitive behaviour between different companies. So, I really do think that it is worthwhile raising this as a particular issue and having the Minister to place on the record of the House how he would see the government responding to that particular concern that was raised at the Select Committee. And as I say, there weren't that many particular submissions on the subject, but this one I felt had some merit. They did appear in front of us, as I recall. If I had my notes in front of me, I think I would have had well, I didn't really have time to get my notes, Mr Cosgrove, because I wasn't expecting this bill to quite come up as soon as possible. But when I come back to the House for another couple of calls on this particular part, then I certainly will have the detailed notes with me, and I'll be able to be assisted in that regard.
Mr Chair.
The Honourable Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Chair.